She's known for her bold yet practical executive coaching and leadership development. Susan Scott, founder and force behind Fierce, the global leadership company that changes the way people communicate with each other, has been challenging people to say the things that are hard to say for 2 decades. Susan's worked across 18 countries with tens of thousands of senior leaders from predominantly Fortune 100 companies. And today, Susan is a highly sought-after speaker and the author of 2 best-selling books, Fierce Conversations and Fierce Leadership. Her latest book, A Guide to Creating a Love That Lasts, is set to come out in early 2022 and is appropriately titled Fierce Love. I'm Gina London, and it's my sincere pleasure to hold what I anticipate will be a fierce conversation with the one and only Susan Scott. Susan, it's an absolute pleasure.
It is for me too, Gina. I mean, you and I spend a lot of time in the same wheelhouse. It is a pleasure to talk with someone who speaks my language.
But we're going to take our time together focusing on what your abilities and your coaching has done for people to help them get more purposeful about their own conversations and their language. And we'll start in 3 sections during this time together. First, we're going to go back in that time machine, and I'm really excited to learn about how and why you started your company. And then second, we'll spend some time having you share those 3 essential foundational ideas that you believe are essential for people. And then finally, we're going to look into that crystal ball, and I look forward to hearing you discuss your future. So Susan, it's been 20 years now. I'm sure it's gone by quickly in some respects, and in some respects, it's been a real labor. So can you take us back to the beginning, and will you share that Susan before Fierce? And what gave you the inspiration to launch it?
Sure. So Susan before Fierce started out as an English teacher. I love to read great literary fiction, and that's what I was doing, teaching it. And then my family moved to Seattle, Washington, where I am now. And I made a career change. I actually became a recruiter. And that's when I started to learn about business. And I'll tell you a funny, quick story. We got a phone call at the agency, at the firm, and one of our people headed out the door to meet with this new client, came right back and said, I'm not going to work with them. I don't know what they're talking about. They weren't even wearing shoes, and their so-called leader looked like he's about 12. And I said, well, I'm from the South. We don't wear shoes unless we have to. I'll go. And I went, and it was Bill Gates. And of course, no, it was Bill Gates. I mean, he had 12 employees, had just moved to Bellevue, Washington. They weren't wearing shoes. I kicked off my high heels. They had no furniture. We sat on the floor. We ordered pizza, and we began. And it was so fun because I didn't understand a thing they were saying. And I admitted it. And I said, you're just going to have to give me the kindergartner version of what that would be and tell me where such an exotic creature would live, and I'll go get the best ones for you. And that began a great relationship with Microsoft. So I was a recruiter.
And I would interject only there to just highlight the idea that even then, maybe instinctively, you already were coming at them and connecting with them in a way that would communicate with them where they were, which I think is fascinating.
Well, and I honestly, I mean, that's good that you called that out, Gina, because I think one of the things that has helped me is my willingness to say, I don't know. I don't know, or I don't understand, or please teach me, say more about that. And genuine humility. I don't think you can fake humility, but it really comes in handy if you have that as a quality. But eventually I was recruited myself to chair a group of CEOs in Seattle. I had to recruit them to my groups. I ended up with 2 groups. Each group had 15 non-competing CEOs. So I had 30 CEOs that I would work with. And each group would spend 1 full day a month together to advise one another on their most pressing issues. And then I would spend 2 hours with each of them one-on-one to surface, well, what are the issues that maybe should go to the group? And boy, I'll tell you, I had to learn fast because clearly I wasn't going to go in and advise these guys in their, 30 different kinds of businesses, everything from software to coffee to manufacturing and everything in between. And
by the way, were they largely guys?
Yeah, they were. They were mostly guys. In fact, in the beginning, there weren't any women at all. And I was thrilled to death when I finally was able to bring some female CEOs into the group because
because we're talking 20 years ago or so.
I know.
And
yeah,
that is an amazing time for you. And I'm sorry to keep crossing
That's
over,
okay.
but I'm fascinated about this leap from you're a recruiter and then suddenly you're consulting or coaching in essence a group of CEOs from all these different sectors as you were describing. Was that through the recruiting company, or how did that? You said you were recruited.
No,
How did that happen?
that was through a friend of mine who had gone to work for that organization, and they told him they needed to hire a female chair because all of their chairs at that point were men, and they figured they'd probably get sued if they didn't hire a woman. He recommended me. They hired me. I probably wouldn't meet their qualifications these days because they were looking for people who had run companies and been CEOs themselves, and I didn't have any of that. So I was the first woman to do it, and I thought, well, this is going to be, I liked the idea because it scared me half to death. I mean, like, I love it when I feel like I'm on the edge of something, and I have to be paying fierce attention because who knows how this is going to go. And so it was quite a ride. And it took me a while to figure out how to have really useful one-to-ones with these guys and gals, and then how to lead those meetings. Well, long story short, eventually I came up with some methodology that really went well. And my peers around the world who were doing the same thing said, what are you doing? Share with us what you're doing. And of course, I'm happy to do that. And then they would say, oh my gosh, I want you to come into my group and teach my CEOs what you're teaching me, because they, I think, would benefit from having these kinds of one-to-ones with their direct reports. They would benefit from running their meetings the way you run our meetings. And so I did, and I ended up traveling. I mean, honestly, I was traveling globally. I sat down in the Sydney Opera House and reached for my seatbelts. That's how much I was traveling.
You're just conditioned to put that.
Every time I said, "Where are my seatbelts?" And then people were saying all along, they were saying, "Would you please write this down? Write this down. Write this down." I can only take so many notes. I love your words. You have a way with words, thanks to my literary background. And I wasn't going to. If I was going to write, I wanted to write the great novel, But eventually, when I had a conversation with myself, what would be something that at the end of my life, if I looked back on it, I would regret not having done? And it was, I need to take a shot at that book. And so I wrote it. And there ended up being a bidding war from the New York publishers. And I ended up with a 7-figure contract. I mean, who knew? I know.
First book, simply on the content, because the content was what were the publishers saying to you? I want to get a little bit of that.
They were saying that my approach to conversations, the ideas that I definitely want to share with you in a little bit, though they were utterly unique. And at the time they were utterly unique. Okay. My premise was totally unique. And so they loved that. And then that advance allowed me to start the company, because it was really clear at that point. I was not the only person on the planet who wanted to have much more interesting, deeper, more productive conversations and meetings. I was in real good company globally. So I started the company. And the rest.
Okay, so I want to stop for a moment and go back, because on the timeline I was trying to determine, it was Fierce the book before Fierce the company. Talk about where the word fierce comes from, because it's phenomenal. And but I want to go back though and unpack a little bit of that incredible experience of the dynamic of being around all those CEOs as you were in the position you were, and seeing the commonality as you're identifying of what they're lacking in communications or conversations, or what they're desiring. And how did you start to pinpoint, as you said, you create a methodology, but at first there's a lot of observation and what that common thread of a gap. What were you seeing among them? And again, noting that they're running companies, so capability wise, they're off the charts, but there's still something missing. I want you to take us to that moment of aha. Look what's happening or isn't happening here.
Well, the moment of aha the epiphany, or as my young niece always called them, the apostrophes.
I love that.
Yeah.
When I listened to you speaking, I love that opening line of the apostrophe.
Yeah, she called it one day and says, "I've had an apostrophe," and I knew what she meant. I've hoped to have apostrophes and exclamation points and semicolons ever since then. But that moment happened. I had been leading these groups for many years, and I was reading Hemingway's "The Sun Also Rises," in which a character is asked, "How did you go bankrupt?" And he responds, "Gradually and then suddenly." And I laughed, and it went boing. And my apostrophe was that our careers and our companies and our relationships and our lives succeed or flatline or fail one conversation at a time. Because I thought back to all of the conversations I'd had with the CEOs, and when something really marvelous would happen, they when I would ask them, "How did you get there? How was it that you landed the client that your customers would kill for? How is it that you attracted the level of talent that everybody is competing for? How is it that your leadership team is kicking butt, is implementing the strategy, is making things happen? How is it that your marriage is a thing of beauty?" And the answer really was always one successful conversation at a time, one successful meeting at a time. And if you flip it, how is it that you lost that client that counted for 20% of your net profit? How is it that you lost that key employee for whom you had great plans? Why is it that your leadership team is coming to you with all of the reasons and excuses why they cannot implement the strategy that everybody agreed to? Why is it that you are about to lose a long-term marriage that you don't want to lose? One failed conversation, one missing conversation at a time. And the second part of the idea is that it is we end up with our results gradually, then suddenly. And we always wake up when we arrive at a suddenly, whether it's a suddenly to celebrate or a suddenly to bemoan. I want people to stay awake during gradually, because that's where we live 95% of our lives, and half the time we're asleep at the wheel. So
yes,
that was the big idea, is that our lives are unfolding for good or not so good, one conversation at a time. So if any of us, if we think of our lives as if we're on this game board, we're in today, here we are in late May of 2021, and we are standing on a particular square on the game board called My Life, and we look at all of the results that we have, results we love, results we don't love, results we're about, and ask, how did I get here? Well, I got here one conversation at a time. And when I think about where I want to go, like 10 years from now, how am I going to get from here to there? Same way I got here, one conversation at a time. And the thing is, we just, most of our conversations and meetings fall so short of what they could be. And the biggest problem is not the conversations we tried to have that didn't go well. It's the ones we avoided altogether. It's the missing conversations. They are the most.
So you're identifying, you're picking up on these conversations and this living in not living purposefully in the gradual during the CEO situation that you're continuing to chair. You're starting to modulize or document things or structure things, and then you're being asked to do things globally and traveling, and then we're writing the book. And you're getting this bidding war. How did you take and put it together, and then what was that experience to put it out there in front of the publishing world for the first time and have that kind of incredible response? What did that feel? Talk about one of those alive moments of celebration.
It was a joy. And honestly, the book, once I sat down to write it, my work had not been organized into 7 principles, but I finally figured out, if if I were going to advise people, what advice would I give them? And it came up with seven things that were primary. I didn't want it to be 7 because 7 this and 7 that, but it insisted on being 7. But once I figured out, okay, that's how it wants to be organized, it wrote itself. And I write, Gina, just like I'm talking to you. I don't write in an academic way. It's not the typical how-to advice book. It's very much as if you and I, the reader, and I are sitting down maybe at my treehouse on Orcas Island. We're having a glass of wine. We're having a cup of coffee. We're having a cup of tea. We're having a beer. We're cooking s'mores over a campfire. We are talking. Please. We are talking. And that's how I write. And I think that's the other thing that attracted publishers. They liked the way I wrote. And so once I signed a contract, I thought, wow, it can't be just me. It cannot be just, I'm only one person, and I cannot be everywhere that I want to be to make the difference. So I've got to start an organization. I remember my husband at the time, he said, are you nuts? You're going to start a company. You're going to have employees. Why would you want to do that? And I said, because I can't do it all by myself. And my oldest daughter helped me start the company in my living room.
Not in the treehouse.
Not in the treehouse, no. In my living room in the Seattle area. And over time it grew. And the thing is, we planned it so that when the book became available, the company would also be available, and didn't know if anything was going to happen. And the phone started ringing. It was just nuts, Gina. And it was very challenging too, because, people would say, well, can you help us with this? Can you help us with that? And I'd say, of course we can. And then I'd hang up the phone and I'd say, how the heck are we going to do that? We had to figure everything out, and everything was customized. And I remember
we call that service on demand.
Yes, exactly. And one CEO from the East Coast said, I'm coming to Seattle on business, and I would like to meet with you. And I said, great. And I said, I'm working from my home. And he said, oh, okay. I gave him the address.
Now it's a thing. It wasn't a thing then.
No,
now it's normal. Now everybody's doing it.
This driver pulls up, and he gets out of the car, and he comes in, and pretty soon he's sitting on the sofa in front of the fireplace with my Jack Russell shedding all over his gorgeous Armani suit. But he was happy to have the dog in his lap, and we're talking, and he said, let's do it. And I thought, wow, this is great. And the other thing was, it was clear that it wasn't about the trappings. It wasn't about the look and feel or the office or the credential. It was just about this man and I were talking about what he was dealing with in his company, and what problems he was trying to solve, and what results he wanted to create.
Yes.
And I was saying, I get it. I mean, I've been working with your peers for 13 years. I've had well over 10,000 hours of conversations with him. I totally get it. And I know we can help. And that's how we started.
It's about the impact, isn't it? And so let's talk then about the impact, first of all, of this incredible name, Fierce.
Yeah.
And as you're writing the book, did the name come first? Did the name come at the end? When did you have this next apostrophe moment about this just so impactful, provocative name, Fierce?
Well, there was a keynote speaker named David White, who's a poet from England, actually lives on an island not too far from Seattle now, a different island. And he gave a keynote. All my peers were there. There were probably, 300 of us in the room. And he used the phrase fierce conversations.
Okay.
And it just went through me like a shot. I thought, I want that. I don't know exactly what it is, and it makes me a little nervous, but I want that. And so the very next day, I was going to be leading yet another one of my workshops for some of our international chairs. And there was a big banquet that night. I didn't go to the banquet. I went to my hotel room. I literally tore up the outline and started all over. And the next morning when they came in, I said, okay, guys, we're going to go someplace different. And you can tell me at any time if this doesn't work for you, I can always revert back to what I've been teaching for years. But I'm calling it fierce conversations. I want to, and so one of the guys even came up, volunteered for me to take him through the coaching conversation that I had developed for CEOs. You could have heard a pin drop in that room. And when it was over, one of the guys said, I did not know that a conversation like that was possible.
Wow.
And I cannot go back now. I'm ruined for life. And we were all kind of holding our breath. And it was like, wow, there's something here. And I did ask David, would it be okay if I used the name Fierce Conversations? That's what I want to call what I'm doing. And I never got to talk to him, but his organization said he doesn't care. That's fine. And so I did. And
and we've not, and we're looking at the company for 20 years now. We're looking at book number 3. And I didn't mean to interrupt you. So keep going on the reflection about the power of this name, and then what it's done for transforming lives.
Well, some companies have said, I cannot work with a company that's called Fierce something because
it's too tough.
Yeah, my employees would be offended by that. They would be, upset. They'd be uncomfortable. And we've always said, look, we explain what a fierce conversation is in the first 5 minutes of any training, and it takes the curse off the road and everybody off the word, and everybody wants it. I mean, it's robust, it's courageous, it's challenging, it's honest, it's authentic, it's all these things that we say we want. And so people have gotten comfortable with it. Most people have, not everybody, but most people have gotten comfortable with it and feel the same way I do. It's like, look, I'm tired of interacting with all of these people who are, this may sound offensive, but sometimes we become these human platitudes. We just say the same things over and over again. The usual suspects are always at the table in a meeting. We all know what everybody thinks. We all know what everybody's going to say. What rises to the surface is more surface. We never get below the, into deep water. I often have said to clients, I love to scuba dive. I love to go into nice, warm, tropical waters and put on a mask and fins and scuba dive. And I love to water ski. That's a blast. But when you put on a tank and you go deeper, there is an entirely different world. So we are not going to be water skiing. We're going to be scuba diving here. And
that's incredible. Nothing I would expect less than from the English teacher turned conversation impactor to describe it in such visionary and vivid terms. I think that's the ability to help people, though, go deep. When I think sometimes they look around the room and everyone is going in this superficial way, that takes fierce courage. That takes fierce determination, and it takes the structure. And maybe this is a good opportunity to segue into those principles, those 3 transformative ideas that I believe are the tenet of being a fierce conversationalist. And if you could share those with us now, we can go back into more of the building of the business as well. But I'm just feeling like we're on the surface of what those 3 transformational ideas are. So let's go deep and share those, if you would.
Okay. We start every single training that we do with these foundational ideas because these address the why. You can teach somebody something all day long, but if they don't understand it, if there's not a clear and compelling why behind it, Correct. They're in no immediate danger of doing it. So this is the why. So it starts with the notion I've already shared with you that we are navigating our lives, our relationships, our careers, our companies, gradually, then suddenly, one conversation at a time. And once people understand that the conversations that I have in my life are either moving me towards what I say I want, away from what I say I want, or accomplishing nothing at all, which is pretty boring, nothing to write home about. And so I probably need to start paying attention to my conversations. The second idea was also courtesy of David Whyte, that poet who I mentioned earlier. In that same keynote, Gina, At one point, he said, the young man who's newly married is often perplexed, even a little irritated, because this lovely person to whom he has plighted his troth, that's how they talk in England.
Yeah, even now.
Yeah, insists on appearing before his face on a regular basis, wanting to talk yet again about the thing they just talked about last night, last weekend. And so often it has something to do with the quality of the relationship. And he's wondering, why are we talking about this again? Could we just have one huge conversation about our relationship and coast for a year or two? But apparently not, because here she is again. And David said, long about age 42, and he smiled because he was 42 at the time and married. Long about age 42, if he has been paying attention, it dawns on him this ongoing, robust conversation that I have been having with my wife is not about the relationship. The conversation is the relationship.
Wow. That is so powerful.
Well, I had just left my marriage and was in mourning over it. And that explained everything. I had been able to have these amazing conversations with CEOs, but not with my husband. And it was, and I realized that this really is the relationship forming one conversation at a time. If I accept that the conversation is the relationship, then if the conversation stops, well, yes, you can do the math. Or if you and I add another topic to the list of things we just can't talk about because it'll wreck another weekend, or at work wreck another meeting, then
yes,
all of the possibilities for that relationship become smaller. And all of the possibilities for the individuals in that relationship become smaller, until one day I hear myself making myself quite small in every conversation, behaving as if I'm just a space around my shoes, engaged in yet another 3-minute conversation that is so empty of meaning it crackles.
Oh my gosh. Can we just stop the recording now? Because that's enough right there. We're done. That was always no wonder, honest to God, Susan, no wonder you impact people's lives in such a way, because the connection to that bare moment, that stark moment that people experience in personal relationships. I can't wait. I'm already signing up for the book before it's released. But the same thing applies in business relationships, in any relationship, because they are all built around a series of interconnected conversations.
And the thing is, Gina, our most valuable currency is not money, although that's nice to have. It's not good looks. It's not charisma. It's not fluency in different languages or in 3-letter acronyms. It's not our so-called pedigree. Our most valuable currency is relationship. Yes. It's emotional capital. In fact, I believe sincerely, and have for quite a while and talk about this all the time, that the next frontier for exponential growth, whether it's for an individual or for an organization, lies in the area of human connectivity.
Yes.
Yeah. And then if
I talk a lot about this in my work, about if artificial intelligence is going to be supplanting jobs, and the way to stay in the game is to be able to have that purposeful human connection. I was calling it communication, but conversation is so much more personal.
It is. People will say, "Oh, you do communication training," and I say, "No, we are focused entirely on the conversation."
So, Susan, you were just talking about the importance of connections in conversations, and I think it might be a great time then to bring in those 3 transformative ideas that every person can attain, or hopefully can attain with your help.
Well, those ideas, I've already shared 2 of them. One of them is to understand that we are navigating our lives one conversation at a time.
Okay.
The second is to understand that the conversation is the relationship. And then the third idea is kind of a bizarre idea, Gina. It's
okay.
All conversations are with myself, and sometimes they involve other people. And what I mean by that is, think about, have you ever left a meeting only to discover that apparently we were all in the same different meeting. We all heard something different in that meeting. Or have you ever sent an email, perfectly innocent email, and learned that the recipient had a different interpretation and ascribed dark and evil motives to your words that never even crossed your mind? And this happens because we're all utterly unique. You know, in the movie The Wizard of Oz, towards the end, where she's in Oz and they're hearing this big voice, and there's lightning and thunder, and Toto, the little dog, he goes over to a curtain and he pulls the curtain back, and here's this little man standing there pulling all of these gears, and the little man turns around and says, "Pay no attention to the little man behind the curtain." Well, we all have that little man behind our curtain, and that man is running the show. That is our context. That's the filter through which we apprehend everything. It consists of our opinions, our attitudes, our beliefs, and some things that we come to think of as the capital T truth. And so I might say X and you hear Y, and we don't understand that we are operating from very different contexts much of the time, and that some of our beliefs are probably not serving us very well, and maybe never did. I think that it makes me sad that in an altered age, so many of us are sort of worshiping in the dead forms of our ancestors, and we hold on.
Explain that.
Well, we hold on to beliefs that we were taught, that our parents were taught, that their parents were taught, that have been passed down for ages and ages and ages and ages, and we just accept them. Even things like, don't bring it in families. Don't talk about that. That's a topic we're not going to talk about. That don't ask Aunt Ethel about so and so, because that would not be good. And at work, what is okay to say, what is not okay to say. And these are the platitudes. Even things like, that saying, great minds think alike.
Think alike. Yes.
That's ridiculous. If we all thought alike, there'd be no innovation, no progress, nothing interesting or new would emerge. Great minds are great because they don't think alike. They're willing to put an alternative view out there, not to try to persuade anybody, but just to say, let me offer up a different way of thinking here. So we have to understand that the most common outcome of communication is misunderstanding. And it happens all the time, but we don't even know it because we aren't checking in with someone. We're not saying, hey, that look on your face right now makes me wonder if you're putting a different interpretation on what I just said. So, what are you thinking? We don't do that.
And so is that part of it then? Once you work with a client or a group of clients and you help them heighten that awareness and understand those three ideas and how important they are, that our conversations are our lives, and that meaning is so important because the little men in the other people's curtains, behind the other people's curtains, might be thinking something completely differently. How then do you help them, maybe, as you said, disrupt those patterns from what they've learned in the past and break through and make those connections? What are some of the hows then?
One of the hows would be, and this is one of the most wonderful things I think that we can do for our clients and for one another, is teach them how to run a good meeting. For example, that little man is very valuable. When we have the usual suspects and when we conduct meetings as we normally do, usually nothing exciting, nothing new emerges, and people are playing solitaire under the table, or they're thinking, especially in a Zoom meeting or whatever. And so what we have to understand, our image is that, think of your organization or your team within an organization, or even your family. Think of it as a beach ball with all these different colored stripes. And everybody in the company, for example, is operating from a particular stripe and is experiencing the company from that perspective. So if I live on the red stripe and you live on the green stripe, you and I can't even see each other because we're on opposite sides of the corporate beach ball. So when you ask yourself, what color is the company? Well, it's everybody owns a piece of the truth about what color the company is. And in a meeting, we need to interrogate reality. No plan survives its collision with reality, and reality has this irritating habit of shifting, which seriously complicates our plans for how things were going to go. So in a meeting, we need to say, look, here's what current reality looks like to me. Now, What am I missing? What are you seeing that I might not be seeing? And I'm really inviting you to influence me. And if we get this right, I'll be different when this meeting is over. Now, that is an attitude. You don't hear that.
That attitude of asking for other people's opinions and perspectives in real time, not just sending out the survey 5 weeks later and then sort of letting those answers sit and maybe not do so much with them. Getting through the placating approach. That's powerful stuff.
And people, even if they ask, even if they say, and a lot of leaders will say, yeah, I want to hear your ideas. But as soon as somebody says, well, I'm thinking such and such and such and such, the leader responds with, yeah, I hear you, but, and they just shot the person down. They're either saying, when you say, I hear you, but, they're either saying, I'm not really asking, or apparently you haven't yet grasped the brilliance of my thinking, or you're wrong. So they kill it off before it's even had a chance to be born. This robust conversation of different competing perspectives, because there are a gazillion competing perspectives on just about any topic under the sun, and the answers are in the room. We need to get to them. One example would be, I remember reading about Jack Welch. They bought a manufacturing company, and he called a big meeting in the warehouse, and all these people were assembled. And he said, we've got a big problem here. Here's the problem, and I really am open to ideas, so you can let me know if you have any thought. Well, way in the back, guy held up his hand. He was wearing a pair of overalls. He worked in the warehouse. They passed a microphone back to him. And he said, well, Mr. Welch, I've been thinking about this problem. I know it's a problem, and I have an idea of how we could solve it. And he shared his idea. And Jack Welch said, that is a great idea. And the guy said, Mr. Welch, all these years, you've been paying for our hands when you could have had our heads for free.
Whoa, that's powerful, isn't it?
Yeah. And the one other thing I'll share that bolsters this idea of the importance of competing perspectives, and of listening and valuing what each person has to say. You don't have to agree, but at least you need to hear it. Came from Madeleine Albright. She and I were both speaking at the same event in Washington, D.C. She was Secretary of State at the time. And afterwards, somebody asked her, Madame Albright, if you had all of the world leaders assembled here and you could advise them, but you could only give them one piece of advice, what would you say? And she said, I would advise them that what matters anywhere matters everywhere. I just fell in love with that idea because I think it's true. What matters anywhere on our planet matters everywhere. Right now, it's not enough for one city to beat the pandemic. We need to solve that problem globally for everyone. Otherwise, we're just going to keep having the problem. What matters anywhere in a company matters everywhere. What matters anywhere in a family matters everywhere, or should. And so until we interrogate multiple competing realities, we're in no danger of making the best decision. Decisions are made just before we hit brilliant, and nothing really new, nothing really truly innovative will emerge. So time and again, I have been kind of embarrassed when I'll start off a meeting in my company and saying, this is what I think we should do for these reasons. Now push back. And they push back. And as I listen to people, I think, wow, it's a good thing I didn't do what I was going to do, because that would not have been the best move. And I'm so grateful to everyone for telling me what they're seeing that I'm not seeing.
And I noticed in your organization, for example, that while you founded it and you're, of course, the personification of it, you have a person other than yourself as CEO.
Oh, yeah. Thank goodness. I wouldn't have been able to write another book. I do. His name is Ed Beltran, and he is wonderful. He is the CEO. And really, he is doing so much innovation in our organization. It blows my socks off. And that allows me to step back and give keynotes or do interviews or host a podcast or whatever, talk with you, Gina.
Yay.
Yay.
And it speaks a lot to the whole idea of the value that you give to other people's perspectives, even within your own organization. And I'd love to draw out a little bit along the line of when you were just referring to the former Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, in this idea that, imagine we're there in the 90s when she was part of the Clinton administration, and how much has come since you first chaired that CEO group that was largely men. And then when you're sharing the stage with Madeleine Albright, maybe the first female Secretary of State, if I'm not mistaken. And this idea of women in these advisory roles. What have you seen over that time around their communications or their conversations, their purposeful conversations over time? And what would you maybe advise for women who are also seeking through their careers in this way to take ownership around their conversations?
Oh, I love that question. I think being a woman was an advantage for me, actually, in working with these CEOs, because a lot of men, I hope I'm not insulting any of the men out there, but I think they're more competitive with other men, and they're not with women necessarily. Here was this woman who would show up once a month and listen, hang on every word that they had to say, and was sworn to confidentiality. So they could say anything to me, and they did. I mean, I had this 50-yard line seat on some fascinating lives, and we covered everything you could imagine. And sometimes I'd be thinking, man, I can't believe you're sharing this with me, but I'm honored that you are. You know, I'm going to hold this space for us. And I don't know that they would have been as honest right off the bat with another man. Although I think as I taught other chairs around the world my approach, I think probably they did start to get the kind of authenticity that I was getting. But I eventually left that organization because after 13 years of chairing these groups and making a big difference and teaching a bunch of stuff, I really wanted to sort of elevate to another role within the company. And I was getting no traction at all. I had presented a plan, to the CEO, here's what I know we want to accomplish. Here are the things in the way. Here's my plan. Here's how I think I could help. And I was just not even getting a meeting with him. And one of the executives said to me, Suze, you're not going to get that role. And I said, why not? And he said, because you want it too much. I remember I was so stunned, Gina. I didn't even understand what does that even mean? I was so stunned. I didn't say anything. I just turned and walked away. And as I thought about it, I thought, if that is a shared belief, if that is a shared attitude, it sounds like he's talked with other people. I mean, then this is not the place for me. This isn't. And so that was one of the reasons why I started to write the book, because I thought, I think there's another piece that is calling me. But I love being a woman. I absolutely love being a woman. And I think a lot of people way back in the day thought that to be successful as a woman, you had to sort of act and talk like a man. And that's not so. I mean, you can be a woman, all female, and be very successful. But the thing is, you need to be genuine. You need to be authentic. You need to be strong. You need to be completely honest and trustworthy.
And you also talk about this radical transparency. Yeah. Can you expand a little bit on that concept? Because I find that very fascinating.
Yeah, that's my TEDx talk. And I loved giving that talk. I think if we cannot get it right for the organization. And by the way, let me just say, a leader's job is not to be right. A leader's job is to get it right for the organization.
That's an important distinction, isn't it?
Huge. It's huge. And in order get it right. I have got to hear from everybody who's relevant to whatever the situation is. And it has to be not what they think I want to hear, or not what they think is going to be popular with everybody else in the company. It has to be what they really, really, really think. And boy, people are terrified. I mean, sometimes I'm just brokenhearted when I hear somebody give me a whole long list of reasons why they can't be honest about X, Y, or Z. And they're afraid that if they said what they were really thinking in the meeting, they would be made available to industry. I mean, George pushed back on the CEO's idea. I sure miss George. He was a nice guy. Yeah. Or, I mean, there are all these fears, and so they hold back. And so nothing interesting emerges. We're just same. As I said, what rises to the surface is more surface. And so radical transparency starts with the leader. I mean, I've always said the fish rots from the head, right? My experience with a Russian-owned fishing company taught me that, which is in chapter 1 in my book.
Which, of course, you've had an experience with the Russian fishing industry.
Of course. Yeah, of course. So it starts with the leader. The leader, whether it's a CEO or just the head of a team, anybody who's in a position of making some decisions and responsible for delivering some things to the organization, you've got to be completely honest, and you've got to be completely open. And you can't say to someone, I really want to know what you think, if you don't mean it. I mean, you can't face fears. You cannot. I mean, we can smell inauthenticity from 50 paces, and we're not having it. So I think the leader who occasionally even says, I don't know, that's one of the reasons why I need your help, or I messed up here. I think that decision was the wrong decision. I'm regretting it. I want to get it, or I was thinking this and now I'm not so sure. And I want your thoughts. I mean, that kind of humility, that kind of honesty. People pull their chairs up, circle the wagons and say, I'm in. Well, how can I help? What can I say? And as soon as somebody does say something potentially controversial, everybody's waiting to see, is that person going to get shot right now? And if that person doesn't get shot, if instead the leader says, thank you for saying that took guts, say more, tell me more. Whoa, then we're all thinking, damn, I wish I'd said that because I was thinking that, but I was afraid to say it. And people start showing up. So this radical transparency, it is what is called for. It is what people will respond to. It holds us able to handle the truth, and we are able. With that fishing company, I mean, we had to tackle some tough issues like bribery in Vladivostok, and it's like, okay, let's tackle that first because that's the biggest, baddest, scariest issue, and let's find out what we're made out of. Let's go there. And we went there, and everybody was blown away by what began.
Even approaching the topic probably was a game changer right there.
It was quiet.
It's an understood thing, right? Don't talk about it. It's just done.
But once we got going, and we had two translators, translate, because a lot of the guys that were there were Russian, didn't speak English or weren't fluent. We had two translators. We wore them out. They were just sweating. They had to take turns back and forth. And I'm thinking, I hope they're getting this right up there. But they were, because once the first person put their toe in the water and said, okay, this is what I'm seeing, and was thanked for that, and say more, tell us more. Once that happened, the dam broke, everything came out, and it was an amazing meeting. I mean, we accomplished so much, and we tackled that issue and a couple of other issues, and people left saying, this was enormous. Thank you for having this meeting. I have felt really bad about some of the things that have been going on in our company. Even the three ships are competing with one another and pulling all kinds of pranks and, lying to each other about where the fish are and all this stuff. So, I mean, what you can learn from any company, the stuff that's going on behind the scenes that nobody's talking about. You got to get that out on the table, because we can solve the problem, but we have to name it first. The problem solved. Well, the problem named is the problem solved. So if we aren't actively naming the problem, we'll never solve it.
That story of the Russian fishing company and what I would call the conversion of how they were running, and then that radical transparent discussion that had to be facilitated by you, I would imagine, to give it a safe space, is a really powerful example of how a company can change. But I'm curious, has there been a disappointment where a leader said, drops his or her head and says, I can't take this on. I see the why, but I'm not willing to make it. Has there been that kind of a story too?
Well, yeah. I mean, even the CEO of the fishing company said, I want to be liked. That's really important to me. I want people to like me, and I don't confront. I know what's
for that reason.
I know exactly what's going on with this guy and this guy, but I'm just really uncomfortable having those conversations. So I coached him and I coached him and I coached him, and he had those conversations, and those problems got solved because those guys knew they were messing up. So that happens a lot. But there have been just a handful. Most of the people I have worked with they're fantastic. I just admire them, respect them, love them. I would do anything for them. And there have been a few guys who are just a little shady. And those are the ones where it's an integrity outage. And
well, there's a powerful phrase right there. And just the golden nuggets in this conversation, folks, if you don't have your mining pan ready, you're going to be collecting loads of gold through this one. But that integrity, it's fantastic. Yes, it is. It's like an integrity outage, isn't it?
Well, and Gina, the medical community has determined that our immune system is affected, of course, by, what we're eating, if we're smoking and drinking too much and, not living a healthy lifestyle, but it's affected most powerfully by the degree of integrity with which we are living our lives. In other words, if and integrity would mean, so here's what I say and here's how I believe, or here's how I behave, and they match.
Yes.
So the degree of my health depends on how aligned am I with my behavior and what I say I believe. And if what I say I believe and my behavior are out of alignment, I am more vulnerable to getting sick. And it's the same is true for individuals and for organizations. When an organization is out of integrity, it's vulnerable. Because bad things happen all the time. I mean, new stuff happens, comes out of the blue, a new competitor, a new gizmo that beats our gizmo or whatever it is, pricing. I mean, all these things happen. But when a company has integrity with what they say they stand for and what they actually do are completely aligned, they can withstand tough times. And they do. When they aren't aligned, well, the wheels can fall off the cart very quickly. So there have been just a few CEOs where I finally have said, I don't think so. I just, there's too much here that feels wrong. And you seem unwilling.
That was what I was going to say. If they're not willing, if they say they want it, but they're not willing to make the changes.
Yeah.
At some point, you probably have to call.
Yeah. And I always say, look, I understand what you think you're gaining by behaving this way, but I want you to understand it's a very short-term gain. Every people who believe in absurdities or behave in absurd ways will eventually commit atrocities, and that is. I mean, I don't remember who said that. Emerson said that.
Okay.
So I don't claim to own that, but I think it's true. If we are hanging on to absurd beliefs for some kind of short-term gain, then our behavior is going to become more and more atrocious. And we're going to arrive at a suddenly that is not going to be fun. Yeah. Yeah. So there have been some disappointments and, but also some breakthroughs. I remember one.
Yeah. Tell me about a powerful breakthrough, and then we'll talk about maybe the future as you see it.
Okay. Well, one of them was, I had a CEO that I just loved this guy so much. Everybody in the group loved him. He was so honest, charming. We would have great conversations. We even talked about fly fishing because we both were fly fishers. And, but my meetings with him were always on Monday mornings, and he always looked horrible on Monday mornings. And I would ask about his weekends, and he'd talk a little bit about, a party or friends came over. And I started to worry that he had a problem. And I was very nervous about it. And I finally said to him, there's something I want to share with you. And if I didn't care a whole lot about you, I wouldn't take the risk because you're not going to like this. But I care about you. So don't shoot me, but I'm concerned you have a drinking problem because I see you on Monday mornings and you look like hell. And he was not happy. I mean, he was, what? I don't have a drinking problem. And I said, okay, all right. Okay. Came back a month later, asked the question that I always would start my one-to-ones with, what is the most important thing that you and I should be talking about? And he said, my drinking problem.
Wow.
And so I think sometimes you just have to, if your gut is telling you something, you just have to run it up the flagpole. You could be wrong, and you have to be willing to be wrong. And you have to say, I could be absolutely wrong. This is what my instinct is. So,
and as you said, because you care, you were willing to take the risk.
Yeah.
And because you'd had those radical, transparent conversations with him prior, even though it took him a month to ruminate on it.
Yeah.
What a fantastic story of his willingness to get radically transparent with himself, because who is he having those conversations with that he's not has a problem is himself, probably, really, that he had to break through.
Yeah. So
and what's this and was he a success at that?
He was. He got help, the help that he needed. He made a pledge. He said, I want to just keep this between us. I don't want to bring it to the group. And I said, we're bringing it to the group.
Wow.
I want to bring it to the group. And I said, we're bringing it to the group because they love you. They care about you. And they need to know that this is a part of your life that is a struggle for you. And I wouldn't be surprised if there aren't some other people in the room who've been there, done that, and can be helpful to you. So I dragged that, kicking and screaming into the group. And
talk about the tenet of humility, though, Susan, that you had to really have him lead by example on this one. How many other people were impacted, would you say?
Well, I think everybody in the room was impacted because we all have issues. We all have something that we're doing that we probably shouldn't be doing, or some part of our life that isn't working very well. And it is so refreshing to say to somebody, man, I am a mess here. I'm not doing well here. I need help. I am embarrassed, or I am struggling, or I am whatever. I mean, that's when we come together and we find out that, we're all human. We're all human. And I just love the fact that when we're radically transparent, the things we are afraid are going to happen don't happen. The opposite happens. Great things happen. Yeah.
Great. And I wonder now if we can move towards your crystal ball and your future prognostications of what might happen in our world coming out, emerging now somewhat, depending on what part of the world you're in, on this post-pandemic, not just from the health situation, but also the mental health situation, the types of companies that maybe had this idea of wellness and employee-centric ideas in the back burner now had to accelerate and put it in the front burner because everyone's remote working, and how do we keep them together, and how do we coalesce as a team, and how do we curate culture and all these things that they might have accelerated during this time, but maybe some companies are starting to think about the hybrid or going back into their offices. And I'm curious, from what you've seen and what you potentially foresee, how have the conversations changed, and how do you hope they continue, or what are the silver linings or the things you'd like to maybe codify going forward as we come out of this time?
Great question. There's a lot to unpack, and I'll just take couple of pieces of it because it's a much longer conversation. But I think
yes, we could do a whole discussion just on this.
We could. So obviously, most of our training was live. We had a facilitator, in a company. We would train their facilitators, and those people would lead these workshops live, and they were great. And then all of a sudden, everything had to change. Everything was remote. And sorry, I have a dog over here well,
this is what we've learned through remote working, that we don't have professional lives and personal lives. We just have lives. Like you say, we've always had this one relationship. So you've got a relationship with the dog, and we'll bring him or her right into the conversation. What's his name?
Her name is Gilly.
Her name is Gilly.
Gilly, after a character in Game of Thrones. And she is a Yorkshire Terrier. And when she lies in my lap on her back with her legs splayed and that little spotted tummy, I'll tell you that evokes so much love in me because her trust is so complete. And, it's really interesting to me that we don't worry about animals. We don't worry if an animal has ulterior motives or is out to get us, or we don't question the ethics of a rose bush. It's just people that we run into trouble
with. The animals are already radically transparent.
Yeah. That little dog just brings out the best in me. I just love her. And I have another dog, and I'm
glad we had a cameo from Gilly. So now that we're unpacking this idea of what companies can do and how your training changed, I think you were just starting to talk about that from in-person to virtual.
For example, we have found that our virtual trainings have been just as impactful and have gotten rave reviews as the ones that were in person. And so one of the things we've learned and how we conduct our Zoom meetings, because we have plenty of those, you have to put some guidelines in place. You have to say, we're going to start on time and end on time. I want you to come at least from the waist up, dressed in business casual. Don't come in your pajamas. We had a bunch of really young employees who would look like they just barely rolled out of bed. No, that's not okay. I want you to put your phone in another room, silence it. I don't want it anywhere near you. I want you looking at the person who is speaking. That's where your eyes should be. And I am going to ask questions randomly of you and ask you what you're thinking about what we have said so far. So you don't want to be caught not having paid attention. And I really do want to know what you're thinking. And at the end of our meeting, we're going to ask you to give one piece of advice based on everything that we've talked about. So there are some rules, even just how to have an online meeting, that ensure that people are there, that they are paying attention, that they're engaged, that they're really fully participating. Yeah. Because, it's not good when people are looking down. People are looking, you're wondering, I know what you're doing. You're playing a game on your phone or something, or you're typing something or whatever. So there are things you can put in place as a company. It's part of your culture. We do have a culture committee, and it's so powerful. I mean, they just had a meeting yesterday that was really fun. They did all kinds of fun things, and they're really wanting to make sure people are cared for. We do everything that we can to make sure that we understand if you're struggling with whether your mental health or your situation where you are, what's going on. We've had a whole bunch of babies born, which is really fun. We celebrate those. But I think you just have to understand that you yourself, whoever you are going to have to model the road. And you see that drawing of a warthog that's on the wall behind me? Can you see that?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Well, I want to explain where that comes from, and it ties into what you've asked me, Gina. I've had the privilege of working with a nonprofit in Kenya, And I've been to Kenya several times. I'm going back again next year. I love Kenya, and I love being out in the Masai Mara, which I think is one of the most beautiful places in the whole world.
Well, if I can't join you in Orcas Island on the treehouse, I will absolutely sign up to go with you to Kenya.
Let's go. Because I'd love to just get out there in the Jeep and just, and the animals don't even pay any attention to the Jeeps. They don't see it as prey. So that you can be right next to a lion, and right next to it, and you're fine. But the Maasai, when they head out in the early mornings with their cows and their goats, with only this cudgel that they have in their hands. They head out, and when two Maasai meet one another, the first one to speak says Sawubona, which means I see you. And the response is Sikhona, which means I am here. And the order is important. It's as if until you see me, I do not exist.
Yes.
So we all want to be seen. We want to be known. We want to be understood. We want to be valued. Well, that requires that we come out from behind ourselves into our conversations and disclose what we're really thinking and feeling. Otherwise, nobody has anything to respond to. We just have this, avatar of you, and we want the real you. So, when I hear people say, I just don't feel like I'm, even a couple, I don't feel like my wife understands me. Do you understand your wife? It gets real quiet, or vice versa. In my work, I don't feel like I'm valued. Do you value your colleagues? You go first. We've got to stop playing the blame game. It's not about he, she, it, they, that did it to me. And if only they were different, or that was different, I'd be happier, I'd be more successful. That is so foolish. So we have to understand, get out of the passenger seat. Take the wheel. You are driving. You are driving.
Yes.
And we all have had teachers, hopefully, who have been wonderfully helpful to us, but nobody, not even our mothers, is going to really make it happen for us. We have to understand, I'm driving. And I think I just drove into a ditch, or I think I'm off the road, or I think I took a wrong turn. I need to turn around. I need to head back in the direction I say I want to go in. I need to do it honestly, humbly. And I need to show up. I have to show up, because until I do, no one can see me.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, Susan, I could listen to you and learn from you for hours and hours, and I can't wait to get the third book. And let's end with a little preview, if we could. We've had fierce conversations, we've had fierce leadership, we have fierce the organization, and now coming up soon, we have fierce love. And you were talking about the relationship of the love, and how do you understand your partner, and do you see them, and how do you show up? So what are some of the things we can look forward to in this third book that I am really anticipating?
Me too. This book has been circling me for many years, because I get emails from people all around the world saying, thank you for writing Fierce Conversations. I'm using it very much at work, and I'm using it at home. I just had the best conversation with my spouse I've ever had. But I wish you would write a book that's just for couples. So that's what this is. And so it explains the conversation is the relationship. It busts 5 myths that tend to mislead and derail us in our romantic relationships. And there are 8 conversations that are so helpful in a relationship. Here are the conversations, and true stories, names changed, of course, to illustrate when to have these conversations and how to have these conversations.
Yes.
So I'm really excited about this. I think this will probably be the most successful of all the books, because this is for the general public. This isn't just for the business world. And what I keep thinking about is, if a company has not brought us in, people don't know about Fierce Conversations necessarily. And yet it's life-changing once you in it. it's a way of life. It isn't just an idea or a tool or a skill to pull out on special occasions. It's a way of life that makes all the difference in the world. So Fierce Love, creating a love that lasts one conversation at a time, will come out in January.
And I know that I am joining everyone who has been listening to this conversation right now and watching you as you tell the stories of the people, the organizations, but the people within those organizations that are being changed with those relationships, and that radical transparency and that willingness to not just be right, but to get it right, because we are just going through our lives. In the conversations are our lives.
Yeah.
And oh my gosh, Susan Scott, you are such a strong person, but also such, as you said, a humble person. The combination is absolutely fierce. And I'm so grateful to have spent this time with you. 20 years already of impacting lives. And now with this new book, Fierce Love, coming out, I'm certain at least another 20 years more. Susan Scott, it has been an absolute pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Thank you, Gina. It's been a pleasure for me too.
Understanding that conversations are our relationships, and that we can get into that driver's seat and see others first. Susan Scott has been fiercely impacting millions of people's lives over the last 20 years, and I am certain she's going to be impacting millions more in the 20 years and more to come. Susan, it has been incredible to spend this time with you in this fierce conversation. And if you'd like to learn more about Fierce or bring fierce conversation to your own organization, please go to fierceinc.com. And if you'd like to get one of Susan's books, Fierce Conversations or Fierce Leadership, you can go to anywhere books are sold. And finally, her new book, as we've been talking about, Fierce Love, will be available in January 2022 and also be available anywhere the books are sold. Thank you all so much for joining us today.